Okay, class, here is the first major lecture, maybe the only lecture, we'll see how much we get through, of the Harlem Hellfighters. All right. Luckily, this one's got page numbers, so it's going to be a lot easier to reference for you. But this starts off with subjective motion, where at first we think we're looking down on the planet, and page 1 here, obviously. And then it come to find out we're actually looking from the point of view of an artillery shell raining down. This is important with World War One because World War One had a lot of the first major explosive weapons, like artillery shells and machine guns being used on a regular basis, and there was just massive devastation in this war, and they were still using what you call trench warfare, where you dig a trench and you're in a trench for a while, and then you try to take the other person's land, the enemy's land, but you may be in these trenches for years at a time, never gaining any ground. There were chemical weapons being used for the first time, industrial chemical weapons like mustard gas and nerve gas for the first time, in this war. But anyways, back to the major concepts. One thing I want you to look for as you read this is the use of irony between what's going on in the narration and in the words and dialogue of, our main character. And our main characters and the narrator, who is an amalgam. I believe Adams is the narrator, if I remember correctly. And between what goes on in the picture. There's often a discrepancy. Sometimes there's a lot of verbal irony or situational irony between what's going on in the narration and the dialogue and what's going on in the picture, which is used to create, both, kind of a humor and also kind of a sickening sadness at the same time. The comic starts off with a pretty typical narration that you might see. Many of you have played, kind of like war video games like Call of Duty. You've probably heard this exact same monologue. I think it's been used in a movie or two as well, and it's neat that Max Brooks does that, because what he does is, he uses it and then he turns it, and we get it from a different point of view than we've got it from before, from soldiers who are treated as second-class citizens, who are treated very poorly in our society. Also, notice this is a black and white comic, and I think that was done, that's kind of Kane White's style, but I think that was also a conscious choice, because I think one thing that Kane White wants to do using iconography, our ability to suspend our disbelief and put ourselves into the shoes of what of the characters we're looking at, as you know from understanding comics, the more cartoonish it is, the more we can identify with them. And I think that, I know it's really hard to tell these characters apart. It's hard for me, and I've read this thing like 5, 6, 7 times. But I think Kane White is making a very conscious choice to make race fairly ambiguous. Like sometimes I have to really look, is this a white soldier? Is this a black soldier? Which one of the soldiers is it? I don't know. And I think by making the race a little ambiguous that way, we can, no matter who you are as a reader, you can feel what these people went through, what these soldiers went through, and what what the various characters experience, because you can plug yourself in. But anyways, the opening scene of violence is repeated at the end of the film, at the end of the comic, but we get it under a different context, which is interesting. It has a completely different meaning at the end, now that we've experienced what all these soldiers have gone through. On page 13, that narration changes, and we get, we get our main characters, so we start to be introduced to. Right now, a lot of them are amalgams; they just couldn't fit everybody in, so. Like the big guy from the Caribbean, he represents all those fighters that came from the Caribbean. And, so I know it's historical fiction, but it's got some non-fiction elements too. And, so that's interesting. Anyways, this is a repeated symbol that you'll see here on page 19. I want you to look for 2 hands, clasped together in some way, whether it be a fist catching a fist or a handshake or whatever. And you get to see it through different combinations of characters. You know, white soldiers, black soldiers, black soldiers, black soldiers, black soldiers, French soldiers. You know, all kinds of things. And so look for that and the meaning each time as you come across it. You know, hands also, you know, ties into that whole, you know, that idea of, you know, one of the symbols of universal brotherhood is a white hand and a black hand, you know, shaking. Anyways, another icon. All right, so just flipping through here 1 second. Apologize. A good example of the use of, you know, irony, situational irony between what's going on, and verbal irony between what's going on in the pictures and what's going on in the content is when they're talking about, you know, for instance, trying to get rifles for the group, or, you know, from page 34 to 35 to 36, and, you know, saying, oh, you know, surely this wasn't, you know, they didn't mean to screw us over. Surely they didn't plan this. And then you see like a couple of rich guys' hands, you know, like, you know, chinking glasses together, cheers, and, you know, lighting a cigarette, you know, cigars, like, haha, you know, we screwed them. And, you know, and then they're saying it's accidental, you know, with a little bit of sarcasm. So that's when, you know, you have that irony, what's going on in the picture, you know, conflicting with what's going on, you know, in the story, you know, creating that verbal irony. Also thought page 53 might be pretty interesting for you to look at. This is when one of our main characters, you know, one of the Harlem Hellfighters is getting beat up by some guys, and then some white soldiers come in and help him, and you know, it made the main character feel, you know, just low, and you know, and you have that symbol of the hand coming out again to help him, and it's interesting. You have like the white soldier here drawn like Captain America, and you know, you have this flag behind him, like he's the all-American one that you know we say is right in this time in this society, and this is what a hero looks like. And the reason I point that out is there's a lot of stuff you can find in these panels. Like, for instance, you've got to look for all kinds of symbolism. Like right here where the white soldiers are standing in the top left of the page, and this is page 53, their shadows are spreading on the floor, kind of looming over you know, the black soldier on the ground, you know, and that seems to symbolize, you know, right now in the society, you know, you'll always be beneath us, you'll always be in our shadow. And they're overlooming, you know, when you look at the angle, you know, you're looking up at the white soldiers in a couple of situations, and then you're looking down at the, you know, our black soldier. And again, that's symbolic of how society viewed these people at this time, you know, viewed African Americans at this time. And so there's a lot you can really look for. I know these panels are simply black and white, but, you know, there's a lot there if you really make yourself slow down and analyze. Page 60 and 61, you know, we get the full moon from when they found out they're going to war to the porthole of the boat. Of course, they get screwed again and get a crappy boat that had to turn around 3 times. We get the parade that the white soldiers got on page 63. You find out at the end of the book, they get the black soldiers get a parade on page 235. And again, now that you've got context, you know, that parade has a different meaning. You kind of find out they weren't throwing a parade when they left. The Harlem Hellfighters were throwing a parade when they got back. They weren't allowed to march in the first one. They were allowed to march in the second one. And then, you know, in the narration, you have, you know, a discussion about how it was, you know, the war to end all wars. That's all BS. All the BS. It just keeps on going. It's, you know, cyclical. And so at the end of the comic, you find out, all right, you know, we're getting a little equality here, and then you find out it was the worst, you know, 2 years after that, and, you know, racial tension and bloody strife and violence in American history. So, you know, you got a lot of craft that went into this thing and how it reflects history. Page 68, I thought was another brilliant use of sarcasm. And it's where you have, you know, just a regular guy, a regular soldier, which is a very common thing to have as, the regular everyday's wisdom, the regular everyday person's wisdom. And in this whole historical thing about, how you have white people that have been going around just killing people for so long in different minorities that now finally, when there's nobody left enslaved, they're finally killing each other now. And that's why we're all really here. I just thought that was a very poignant and very smart and messed up and darkly humorous way of seeing this war from that point of view, and another use of irony there. Even more, irony and the idea of, a lot of this is the idea of these soldiers fighting more than one war at the same time. They're fighting war with society. They're fighting a war within themselves. They're going to fight a war with the Germans. They're fighting in a war for equality, for being treated fairly. And, and even when they land on the docks on page 81 in Europe, they fight a war, in a sense, with their own, African-American, well, I don't know if they're in the military or what, but they're basically being used as labor or being paid for labor. I don't know. At the docks, and they don't like the idea that these guys are soldiers, so they've even fighting a war, amongst their own race, if you believe that's a thing. It's very, very interesting. Very interesting. You have soldiers that fight a war with themselves, like the guys who have shell shock. Another example of situational irony is on page 89, where we have kind of some play, the different combinations of words and pictures here that we looked at understanding comics. You have, on this side, the American flag, and so our own country didn't want us, and then on this side we have the French flag. Another country needed us.